All right, so there's going to be these two new series. There's going to be the Wasting Talent series, where I'll basically go through the entire book and I'll read it. So, you'll get half the video will be me reading out of my book, and the other half will be me telling stories about when that part of the book was written, what it's based off of. And that may sound boring, but I haven't done it yet, so I'm not sure if that's, if it'll come out as well as I think it will. But I'm pretty sure that I can make that one a pretty interesting story, because I don't know, I was just looking through my book the other day and I was thinking of stuff that, what happened during that specific time. And sometimes when I'm going through the 5 years in federal prison, for example, that's when I wrote that book. I'm trying to tell the story in a pretty structured way in my mind. I don't ever sit down and pre-plan videos. I'm not oh, it's got to end on this cliffhanger. This needs to happen. I need to mention butt fucking 7 times. It's not some math equation. It's just, I never really think about my videos at all. Really, my method for doing them is, you got to remember, this is not made up stuff. As outlandish as my life has been, all the stories that I've told you guys so far are true, Jeff suggested that I do a fictional storyline and tell you guys that it's fictional, but see if I can freestyle and tell stories that aren't true. And I'm that sounds fucking lame. He's well, you should experiment on at least one video. But I would tell you guys first. I'd say, okay, this is not a true story. Or maybe I'd tell you after, so that you don't go in with preconceived notions. But for now, we don't need to do that, because there's 100 fucking things that I can talk about before we have to get to that point. That's down the line. Sometimes I'll listen to videos. I've been doing that lately because I was repeating myself, and I know that a lot of people were getting mad about that. They'd be like, you're like an old drunk guy. You just keep repeating your shit over and over, the same thing. So, and now that with Patreon, fundamentally the point of it is to have exclusive content that nobody else gets to see. That's why there's a subscription. I've always said that I'd like to be able to do 3 stories a day. Really, it's come down to time management. The last couple days, honestly, I've had literally no extra time. Maybe I'll have an extra 15 minutes here, whatever, but I don't like being in a situation where I feel rushed, or it doesn't come out as good that way. So now I'm back. I have nothing planned for a while. Sinister wants me to go over because he's horny, and I'm I don't know, dude. You're old, bro. Trying to hook up with a 24-year-old, you know what I mean? He's oh, yeah, I get it. But I'm just going to stay here because I have a lot of making up to do. But I think historically, if we look back at how I operate, I do make up for shit that, if there's periods where I haven't been as productive, I will make up for it. And that's what I'm doing now. So Wasting Talent will be its own series, and I'm excited about that one. Maybe you guys aren't. And I think that until I actually do one, I'm going to do one today. I think that you guys will, I'm pretty sure you'll like it, but I'll know right away. I don't read the comments anymore because they just drive me way too fucking crazy, especially right now, with my parents and all the outside stuff. The last thing I want to hear about is how much I suck at life. I know already. I know. I have a fucking shark tattoo. Imagine being a guy with a shark tattoo. How you'd feel. You'd feel bad inside. So, here we are on how I made $500,000 redux. And I've not pre-planned this in my mind. but I know that there's a lot of stuff from that time period that I glossed over. And like I can go more in depth into it. And people seem to like stuff from that era. So without further ado, let's get into that period. So if you guys remember correctly, basically that was when I was 21 is when that had started. And when I was 19, a lot of stuff went down in my life. My first girlfriend broke up with me, and I just went off on some like emo drug addict shit where it's like, I'm gonna be homeless, and my parents are like, you don't need to be homeless, just go clean your room. I'm like, oh, you don't understand. You don't want me here. You don't understand me materially. And I like had like black fingernails, and they're like, okay. And so I was voluntarily homeless. You got to understand that, because that's to me, that's an important aspect of the whole thing. Is when I became homeless when I was 18, I was actually 19. It was voluntary, and it was because I was depressed. And I think a lot of it was that I just wanted to go out and experience shit. You know, I was like, I want to go stab a skinhead. It sounds bomb. And that's exactly what I did. And so that happened when I was 19. And I'd say that that's probably like an important milestone on the timeline of my life, is that I stabbed somebody. I stabbed somebody, and it created a lot of problems for me within Santa Barbara, because Santa Barbara is a small town. It's not a gangster place. There's like maybe a few bad apples within it. So, I mean, say there's like 7 bad people there. It's probably a little more than that. I stabbed one of the apples. Started eating it like an apple bob. It's just metaphorically. And now I had people looking for me. And that's really how I got out to Florida to begin with, was that people were after me. And then I ran out of the courtroom when they were trying to remand me and make me do 6 months. And I was over it. So now I'm running from the law. I'm running from a group of white gang members called Nazi lowriders. They're as whack as they sound. And like nowadays, they're like running yards. You know, for the longest, they were considered pieces of shit and no good. And I think that they are to this day. But back in that time period, this is like 03, 04, it was not a group of people that you wanted to have a problem with. And I feared for my safety. I mean, that's honest to God, I stabbed this dude above the kneecap. He was never able to walk right again in his life. And his friends weren't very happy about it. And when you're a Nazi lowrider, you know, you have access to other Nazi lowriders. I'm not sure how. This is like before the internet. It's not like they had NLR fucking apps. Where it's like, where like a push notification comes up. They're like, one of your NLR comrades is in the area. It's like, whoa, let's get a bite to eat with Snake or whatever, you know. It wasn't, but back then everybody was on landlines, and there was really, I think it was more organized back then. It was like a network, and it was more low key. And the point is like, not only was that particular group in Santa Barbara after me, but there were people down in Orange County where they were from that they had called on to come after me as well. I think there was a bounty on my head, you know, and it's not like in some, you know, Italian mob movie. It's not like somebody had like 20 grand. We're talking about someone had like a teener of meth on my head, you know, and some like skinny carny was like, oh my God, I need that. That's like $40. And then they came up and were looking for me. And for real, people were looking for me. And I was doing a lot of meth at the time, because I went out to Isla Vista, which is the college town. And I lived with this guy, Alex. And I was selling meth, and I was doing meth. So I was paranoid anyway. And when you're paranoid, you have Nazi lowriders after you, you have cops after you. It's a bad time period. And then eventually I go out to Florida. The Mike Virgin stuff happens. I end up doing time out there. We're still in that storyline from when I was incarcerated in Florida. And that was a bad experience. I got beat up quite a bit. I was like the only white guy. Still voted for Obama in 08. I was like, they didn't mean it. Fuck it. I like those guys. but I really dealt with racism on the other side of most people think, I don't know. Now we're in an interesting time because of Black Lives Matter and everything. And you're starting to see that racism can exist on all sides. See, that was like a big misconception, I think, for like a long, long time, is that like only overweight white guys that burn crosses in the woods were capable of being racist. And it's just not true. There's black dudes with cargo shorts in Chicago that hate white people. And I wish that we all liked each other, but we don't. And I experienced racism for the first time when I was incarcerated in Florida. And that was probably like 05 now. That's before I'd gone out to Albuquerque. And when I came back to Santa Barbara, I ended up moving up to Monterey for a little bit. You guys know that story. And the only reason I'm like kind of bringing all this stuff up is so I know where we're at on the chronology of things. And so you kind of are reminded. But I went back out to Monterey. Remember, I had that thing where I had Cookie Crisp and I was in the bed and I shit and pissed and vomited on myself. Then my parents sent me back out to Florida. I went to Orange County, got kicked out for having sex in the shower with a guy, the girl named Shannon. What? That's a guy's name. What the fuck? That's actually a girl's name, but I do know a guy named Shannon, and that's who I was fucking in the shower. And so I end up going back to Santa Barbara, and then I went out to Albuquerque for a while. Albuquerque, you guys have heard that story. I did it in I covered that in one video. I wish I hadn't, because I probably could have spread that out for a few. And maybe at some point I'll do another Redux series where I go back into that stuff and try to explore some of it. It's just I don't remember what I said and what I didn't say. So what I didn't cover. So like with the Florida series, I kind of just went over everything again. And perhaps I'll do that with this one as well, just so that I don't leave any details out. But I think for this first one, we're going to just go into like more exclusive territory, so we don't have to do that. But you guys comment and tell me if you want me to just redo this whole series and like just go way more into it. I can, like I did with Florida. But that's not what this video is going to be like. So after I came back to Santa Barbara, after I went to Albuquerque, I come back, and if you guys remember what had happened, I started dating my neighbor, and she was like 5 years older than me. Her name was Jenny, and that was not like some whirlwind romance or anything. That girl was more like a caregiver than anything else. Like in the traditional sense of like what a caregiver is, like where I'd be like, I like couldn't move and I was like in the bathtub and she's like giving me sponge baths. And she's just like, what do you want to do today? And I'm just like, nah. That's how fucked up I was on drugs. She was really like, without her, I don't know if I could have, I know for sure I wouldn't have been successful in selling drugs. So during that period, remember, I'm on heroin. I'm hiding it from her. And she ends up sending me to rehab. I cheat on her. She cheats on me. And I think that at that point, we kind of drew lines in the sand and we knew that our relationship was pretty much bullshit. I don't know why. I think we were both just codependent or something. I mean, we really, like, to be completely honest with you, kind of, we weren't even, like, that wasn't really what our thing was. It was me just really, really doing bad on drugs and her kind of taking care of me. And eventually, the whole thing happened with the Pink Floyd tickets. And that's how I became a drug dealer. Because Jeff and I, my dad, that was like the one thing I had to look forward. That's how fucking shitty my life was. I was like voluntarily homeless, eating out of skinheads. There was like diabolical Nazi lowriders that, were after me. And my dad got us tickets to see Pink Floyd. And so Jeff and I, for like an entire year, we were all pumped up to go see this show. And then I met Jenny and I called Jeff and I was like, hey, I'm going to take my girl. I'm a piece of shit. I'm sorry. And he got really upset with me. And I wasn't willing to give up my relationship like that. So then I had gone to the skate park. I met a guy named Jacob wearing a Pink Floyd shirt. He asked me if I could get acid. I couldn't get acid at that time because I was, I would call my SA drug dealers and they'd laugh at me. I'd be like, hey, do you have any acid? They'd be like, come on, dog. Who fucking sell heroin and crystal meth? Fucking acid. What are you, fucking in high school, you stupid bitch? I'm like, all right. And then eventually I found it with this guy, Damon. And I think that's where we're going to start the story now. So when we had gone to that show, it was Jeff, his girlfriend Rose, my girlfriend Jenny, and we had this carload full of kids. And the whole deal was that they couldn't get acid, but they needed acid for this Pink Floyd show that was coming up. It was really just Roger Waters, the singer, but just for argument's sake, it was Pink Floyd. It's easier for people to understand. It was the singer singing Pink Floyd songs. So we go down to this show, and remember I talked about it, like, I hadn't done acid for a few years. These kids had never done it. We give it to them. I'm like 21. Jenny's like 26. These kids are like 14, 15, and 16. Sleazy as fuck, right? We're driving them down there and we give them acid. One of the kids had a freak out and was like, I'm adopted! And he was like hitting his head against the window until his forehead was bleeding. And we're like, hey man, hey, knock it off. Let's go watch Pink Floyd. And we were on acid too. It's amazing that we didn't start freaking out as well. We go down there and, it's always interesting being at like a large scale show like that. When you're on like a intense psychedelic like LSD, it's an amazing experience. For me, things are dictated by my surroundings and just the fact that there was some of my favorite music blasting out of this amphitheater kind of let me fall into the music and I was okay. I wore a hood. Jenny and I just watched, Comfortably Numb and all these epic Pink Floyd songs. And I think it calmed the kids down. I don't know. Once we got there, kid's forehead was bleeding. He's like, adopted. And we're just like, man, you're embarrassing us. We're going to sit by ourselves. And we did. We had a really great night. So the next day, and Jeff and his girlfriend Rose, they had left. They didn't want to be around kids. I think Jeff's girlfriend was like probably 22. He was probably 23 at the time. They don't want to hang out with 15, 16-year-old kids. So they took off and they like drove out of Hollywood tripping on acid, whatever. We end up going back to this hotel. My dad had gotten us a hotel, I think at like the Best Western. I don't know, something like in the middle. Not too nice, not too shitty. And we partied all night. We had Coke, we had Molly. Kids all eventually chilled out. And I remember the next day we woke up. I was driving my 85 Volvo back then. We woke up and we were going to head back to Santa Barbara. Now, the day after you do MDMA, cocaine, LSD, you have this like very groggy hangover. And I remember we had gone up to the house where the Manson murders had happened. Roman Polanski's house, where Sharon Tate and Abigail Folger, all those people got murdered. I don't know why. We're like, let's go smoke herb where all these people got murdered. That'd be dope, and that's what we did. And we would go and we're in front of this house. And the house is interesting. I mean, I've always been very interested in the Manson case. I don't know. I mean, it's just interesting. You got this guy that the government was giving MK Ultra experimental mind control tests to, or applying that stuff on him in federal prison. He gets out and somehow he's able to convince a bunch of people that would otherwise not have been inclined to getting in trouble to go murder celebrities up in the Hollywood Hills. I don't know. I think I was just into it because like I saw a documentary and they're like, he did acid and he got fucked in the ass by his homeboys. I was like, yeah, that's gross. This is disgusting. Pretty interesting though, huh? And then I was just into the whole thing. I don't know. It interests me. It interests me because I've done a lot of acid. I'm not going to say that I've ever been like on acid and thought about killing someone. Well, that's not true. I probably have done that. But I don't think I would act on it. The fact that somebody was able to cross that threshold. The fact that there's a lot of people that think that he was able to do that because he was controlled by the MK Ultra. Maybe that's too conspiratorial, but I don't know. The point is we were smoking bud up at that house. And I think that the Manson case in general attracts a lot of the counterculture. That house is spooky. It's up on Benedict Canyon, right above Beverly Hills, right in the Hollywood Hills. It's up by Mulholland Drive on Benedict Canyon. And I swear to God, when you get up there, you can feel the negative energy. It's like evil. It's like palpable. You can feel it. And we're just like smoking blunts. We're like, I'm so stoned. Murder is funny. Happens so long it's not even real, but it is. It's like, I know for a while Trent Reznor and Marilyn Manson were recording up there. Trent Reznor had owned the house, and they were like recording albums in the room where the murders had happened. That's kind of weird, I guess. I don't know. It's weirder than shit that I do, and that's saying quite a bit, right? So it's kind of what our life looked like back then. I didn't have a job. At that point, I had been like pretty much living off stealing $60 a day out of my mom's purse, which I didn't feel good about. I justified it in my mind, how I always had with my family. Oh, they have money. It's not going to affect them, but it will affect me if I don't get well today. So I may as well do it. If they really understood that this is the difference between me being dope sick and not, they'd want me to have it. That's the kind of heroin addict logic you have when you're stealing from the most important people in your life. And, like this Pink Floyd concert was the biggest thing that I had going. Now, if you remember from the story, I'd gone to this guy, Damon. Probably shouldn't say his real name. Damien. I'd gone to Damien's house, and he was weird. He was like this guy in a Speedo, classic drug dealer, like shit you'd see in a movie. And that was the first thing about this whole time period when I went from not having a goddamn cent to literally having $500,000 cash. It all felt cinematic. Felt like some shit you'd see in a movie. And I've always been convinced, and I was talking to my dad about this the other day. In prison, for example, right? You get to prison, like riots pop off and people are getting stabbed, and you're like, holy shit, this is just like in the movies. Well, there's like this collective expectation thing where people in prison start acting like they're in prison. They're like, well, fuck, I'm here, let's stab somebody. Hey, look at that guy. That guy looks weird. Fuck you, bitch. Stab him. Like, yeah, I'm in prison. Because they're playing the part that popular culture has told people that that's how they should act, right? It's the same kind of thing with selling drugs. This guy Damien wore a Speedo. He's greased out. He's hanging out with college girls. They're running around in bikinis, sometime in thongs. I mean, it was a very like hedonistic atmosphere. And he was a burnout. He seemed like he didn't have a care in the world. Like, hey, man, I've got MDMA. I've got pounds of it, bruh. And you're like, it seems like it's this flippant thing where if he were to get caught, he wouldn't be in that much trouble. Knowing what I know now, he had the kind of drugs where if he had gotten caught with like a couple pounds of Molly, grams of LSD like he had, pounds of mushrooms, you're talking about he would have gone away for 15, 20 years in the feds. It's serious stuff. They don't play when it comes to psychedelics. And MDMA doesn't have any mandatory minimums, so they can basically lock you up as long as they want to lock you up, And I saw somebody when I was in prison, this guy named Ryan Braisky, who's a supporter of mine. He's out now. He's a great guy. He's like a little hippie kid. And what had happened to him is he was from Chicago. He was selling Molly, allegedly. Sorry, Braisky. I think he is on Patreon. He's driving with some of his homeboys. They're going from a festival. They're probably, I don't know. I think they were like in Ohio or somewhere like that. somewhere wherever they were, somewhere in the Midwest that had more of like a redneck feel than Illinois, where he was at. And so he's driving somewhere in the Midwest, going to a festival. They're rolling joints. They have 2 pounds, a little under a kilo of Molly in their van. Now they have it in the door. The door has been hollowed out. There's like you can just get a screwdriver. You can take the plate of the door. I'm probably not saying it correctly. I'm not a man. I have no cock. I know nothing about cars. But what I'm saying is that he was transporting Molly in this van with some hollowed out, like, sliding door in his van, however you say that. Him and his friends look like a bunch of dirty hippies. They all have, like, dreadlocks, you know? They look like Modish Yahoo or something. That's those kind of guys. I guess what Post Malone would look like if he didn't have face tattoos. If you know what I mean. It's a very weird thing to say. But anyway, they end up getting pulled over. Police are suspicious of them. They say, of course, the old, smells like marijuana in here, boys. We're going to have to search the car. So they start searching the car. They don't find anything except for an empty gram bag that they had urban. There's like a little, like, couple, like, goldfish food flake sizes of weed in this gram bag. Cops were like, get on the ground! And they're like, oh my God. It was like some fascist shit. They were like stomping on their heads with boots. Like, what is this? And they're like, it's weed. Like, is that a big deal? They're like, yes! Now we're gonna search your whole fucking car with the K9 to find the rest of your weed. This shit's in a translucent gram bag. So they get there, and they don't find it. They bring dogs. Dogs aren't barking or anything. They're just about to leave, and I guess, one of the cops, maybe the dog had started barking. I forget the detail of it. But for whatever reason, they wanted to look. They wanted to, like, knock on different parts of the van and see if it had been hollowed out or whatever. And they figured out that there was like a false panel in it or whatever. They open it, 2 pounds of MDMA. They get busted. My friend Braski got 15 years in prison for that. 15 years, and this is a guy that's definitely didn't deserve it. In a lot of ways, what he was doing was a lot more innocuous than what I was doing. It was just club drugs. And that whole scene had this vibe where, like, like that guy Damien, yeah, brother, it's all good. It's definitely not all good. And it's interesting because when you're around people that sell, like, I've been around people that have 10, 20, 30 pounds of heroin at their house at a time. I've been around 40 kilos of cocaine. Like, I've been around some pretty big amounts of large quantities of drugs. Big weight. And people like that, there's always this, like, unspoken nervousness about, like, you can definitely see that they're trying to laugh and have a good time, but they're scared that at any moment the door can come crashing down. With the Molly, acid, club drug, these kind of, like, festival crowd, people are much more laid back. They probably just don't really understand the consequences. But they're pretty severe. So that's what kind of guy Damien was. And if you remember what had happened with him, I'd gone to his house to get the acid. Show up, there's girls in bikinis. This guy's greased up in a Speedo. Right off the bat, it seemed like something cinematic. Like, back to my point, like, he was trying to play the part of being the drug dealer. Like, he's like the weird drug dealer that walks around with the Speedo. He's got this little bulge in his Speedo that you can't stop looking at because you're just like, this is weird as fuck. None of my boys dress like this. And then you start thinking about if you dress like that, what your bulge would look like. Like, I don't even think it would look like, it would just look like I have a camel toe. My ball sack would fold. I'd be like, dude, is your homeboy is he transgender? Oh, no. He's got a small dick, so his balls fold to make a little, okay, anyway. I had gone there literally knowing that I could scam this guy out of drugs. He told me that he had acid over the phone. I go there without any money because that was my whole plan. These kids had said if I can get them acid, they would get me additional tickets to Pink Floyd. My dad already had 2 for us, one for me, one for Jeff. As soon as I started dating Jenny, I was like, hey, I'm taking my girlfriend instead. Jeff was like, you're a punk. Don't ever call me again. And I felt bad. It was my best friend. So I was trying to make it right. And I do that sometimes. Like, I'm the kind of guy, if I make a mistake, I'll try to I'll try to correct it pretty quickly. I do have a conscience. I'm not like all just I'm not seething with dirtbag tendencies like that. There is some good in me from somewhere far away, So when I got into his house, the story, I asked him for acid. He ends up showing me a trunk under his bed. Most drugs I'd ever seen. If I had to put like a monetary value on it, I'd say it was probably $250,000 worth of drugs. I mean, he had a key of cocaine in there. He had multiple bags of different powders, pounds of mushrooms. This is in one of those big trunks that one of those old school trunks that you put on a train or whatever. He had vials of LSD, $250,000 worth of drugs. I'd never seen that many drugs in one place. And I'd never seen that kind of versatility. He had everything. And he's like, what do you need? And I made the comment, wow, you're a drug connoisseur. And he's like, yeah, And I'm like, I can't stop looking at the bulge. I'm just like, wow. It's just odd. I don't know. It's weird. He's like, hey, man, are you looking at my bulge? I was like, no, let's talk drugs. He's like, okay, all right. Sometimes people come over and do that. I don't know. He told me he didn't have DMT. And he's like, that's the one thing that I'm lacking. Of course, I'm quick to just be like, I have that. I didn't even know what that was at the time. And as the story goes, he says that he'll trade me like $2,000 worth of drugs for DMT. I go home. I look on the internet. I find DMT. It's a reddish, rosy, kind of dirt-looking substance. Fuck, I don't have anything like that. It kind of looked like Indian clay, which is, I remember when I was like a kid, we'd dig in sandboxes and we'd find this dirt that had like a reddish tint to it. And that's kind of what DMT looked like. And looking back, maybe could you imagine, I drive to a school and there's kids playing on the playground and I have a little plastic shovel with me. I'm just making holes trying to get this Indian clay out of the dirt so that I can go sell it as DMT to this drug dealer that wears a Speedo. So that wasn't something that was realistic. But what I did find is that there's another kind of synthesization of DMT that comes in white crystals. I was like, okay, well, that looks a little easier to find something that looks like that. You can I used to sell fake meth to people when I was really deep in my addiction, and you could go to a pet food supply place and you could get MSG. And that's, it's like horse food or, I don't even know what the fuck that is. You put it in I think it's called MSG. I haven't done that for a long, long time. But you could go to the store and you could buy something. I believe that's what it's called. And it's really interesting because it looks like shards of meth. It actually burns like meth. If you put it in a glass pipe and you cook it, it'll melt down and it'll puddle. So a lot of people cut meth with that. They put some real shards of meth in and then they put some of this MSG shit. It's very common cut. And that's kind of what DMT looked like, but they were bigger crystals. And in my mind, I'm like, you know what? Those look like water softener crystals. And my parents had a water softener. And if you're not from California, I don't know if there's water softeners in other parts of the country. I believe there are. But in California, for some reason, in certain parts of it, the water pressure is abnormally high, right? So people have water softeners. And you put salts in it, it changes the density of the water, I think. I don't know. I'm totally just speculating how it works, but people have these salts that they put into water softeners and it looks just like DMT. I happen to have a digital scale. I weighed out an ounce of it. I put it in a plastic bag. I wrapped it up with tape And I brought it to him and he bought it. You know, he's like, whoa, man, far out. You know, he's talking like some 70s drug dealer. And he just gives me all of these different, it was insane. I felt like I was like on some sort of like obscure drug shopping spree. And he just let me pick out everything, you know? And he like gave me some coke. He gave me a lot of Molly. Never even heard of the drug at that point. Really nobody had, you know? MDMA had been around for a long time. It had been around like, you know, I think it got popularized in the 80s, in like the club scene back then. They had it even before then. I know in different parts of Europe, I know they were using it for marriage counseling here. MDMA had been synthesized, you know, 40 years ago, 50 years ago even. But at this point, it was like 05, Molly was being really commercialized and introduced into the drug world. And so he had an abundance of that. He had so much Molly, he just was like, here, just take all this. It was like all these gram bags full of it. And then there was like another plastic. And I'm like, what is this? He's like, this is MDMA. And he let me try it. And I started rolling. And so I took a bunch of that. I had some of the acid and some of the mushroom. So anyway, after that show, you know, I was able to save the day. I got the tickets. I bring the kids down there, give them acid. Kid starts hitting himself against the window because he's having a bad trip because of his adoption shit. And after that, I still had the surplus of drugs. Now, I'm a heroin addict. I'm not hanging out with like raver people. I'm not hanging out with people that are doing psychedelics. So I have no use for this stuff. The kid Jacob that I was with, he was 16. And that was his real name. I don't know what I named him originally in the series. His real name was Jacob. He asked me, he goes, hey, what are you going to do with the Molly? What are you going to do with this other stuff? I hadn't even put thought into it, you know? And really, it didn't have a lot of value to me because, like I said, that wasn't my scene. He's like, give it to me and I'll sell it and I'll give you the money that I make. Like, basically, he was telling me he didn't even want to make money off it. He just wanted to be, like, cool and be the guy at school that had all these like obscure drugs. I was like, okay, whatever. Not thinking in my mind that it was even possible that he'd be selling, that he would be able to get rid of it. He calls me the next day and he's like, I got rid of it. Here, you know, gives me a few grand. And then I had called Damien at that point and I said, hey, that DMT that I gave you was bunk. Let me make it right. Let me give you this $2,000. And he's like, wow, man, that's really solid of you. Come on over. And so I went there, and of course, he still had the bulge, and I was like, oh, man, that's crazy. And I gave him the money, and now I had extra money that I had made off the profit that Jacob had made, so I bought an ounce of MDMA. Now, back then, Molly was going for, and this wasn't even MDMA, this was MDA. This is sassafras, right? This is one of the precursors to crystal meth. MDA can be synthesized out of tree bark, or the sap called sassafras, to my best understanding of what it is. And it was totally new. It's, you know, ecstasy, but it has more of like a hallucinogenic quality. It's the sex drug version, you know? So there's MDMA that gets you really like, makes you want to dance. And, like, you see people and you're like slapping the bass. And then you're like looking up at you're like, what the fuck? I don't ever do stuff like this. And then you're embarrassed about it and you never do shit like that again. That's MDMA, right? You dance all night. That's like what I do now these days. And I'm like fucking Karina from behind it. I'm like, she's like, please stop. I was like, all right. I was just feeling it. MDA though, the stuff that I had back then was like a downer. So you'd like, you know, you'd snort it or take pill capsules of it, and then you'd just be like, you know, and people would come up to you with like the Vicks Vapor Rub little tube and inhale it, and it would send these like ripples of euphoria through your body. That's what MDA is. You get a lot of tracers off it. So I end up buying another ounce, and I give most of it to Jacob. You know, I think I gave him at least half of it. It was $1,600 for an ounce of it. So each hit was a point. So, you know, there's 10 points make up a gram. There's 28 grams in there. Oh, 2 points made up a hit, I think. Anyway, whatever the point was, I gave him some. And then Jenny and I ended up putting it into capsules and making hundreds and hundreds. We went and we got a motel, and we went to the local vitamin shop, and we bought a bunch of these vegetable capsules. We went to this motel. I think we called over a couple of girls that she was friends with, and we all sat there and we just started making these pills up, because the way that those vegetable caps work that you get at a store, right? There's the small end, and then there's the longer end. The small end was, I think, exactly 1 point. So I think it was 1 point was a hit. And that's all you had to do was fill up the small side with powder, put the long side on it, shake it up a little bit, boom, you have a hit. So we had like hundreds of these Molly pills. And Jacob was just getting rid, any powder I'd give to him, he got rid of instantly. You know, I mean, you got to remember, we're in Santa Barbara, California. He's in high school. You know, of course, I think that selling drugs to high school kids is a dirtbag thing to do. I wasn't that old at the time. I was like 21, 22. My moral compass was so skewed. I didn't even like acknowledge that I was doing something wrong at the time. But in retrospect, I can admit that that was not a cool thing to do. But Santa Barbara, California, it's such a rich place. You know, the ghetto, like the most super serio Southsiders. They're like, hey, dog, I want to get stoned on methamphetamine and butt fuck my uncle, dog. Like those kind of people. $500,000 houses, $600,000-$700,000 houses. You know, Jeff has owns a condo in Santa Barbara. It's a 2-bedroom. It's not that nice. $600,000 for that. So it's a very wealthy town, and therefore a lot of the kids that are doing drugs there are doing drugs with their parents' money. So there's this huge market in high school for people to buy stuff like that, especially Molly. Just blew up and became super popular. So as that's going on, my drug addiction starts increasing. And Jenny was okay with coke, but she wasn't okay with me doing heroin. And it was like one of those concessions where I do coke with her because she was okay with that, but she wasn't with heroin. So I wanted to just do something that she was okay with because I wanted to get loaded. I was like, I'll do whatever. It doesn't matter to me. So we start doing cocaine together. And because we had done that, we met that couple, and I know I've talked about them. They were named Kevin and Erica. They were out in a town called Isla Vista, and they were big time drug dealers. You know, they would sell a couple kilos of coke a week. They were growing weed at their apartment, and we started going there to pick up coke right away. And I always kind of got in. I always like felt like something bad was going to happen when we were at that place, because it was insane. They'd get a couple kilos of cocaine, which is like 1,000 grams for each key, and they'd be selling the stuff individually. They wouldn't be selling it in ounces. So there would be people coming in and out of their apartment all day long. It screamed of drug dealers living there. And I'd always be super paranoid because I'd be coked out there. One day we're over there, and this other guy comes over. His name was Matt. That was his first name, and that's like his real name. This guy, Matt, was their coke connection, and he was a white dude from Sacramento. Now, I guess he used to be like a football star, and he had like this, you know, a prospect of going to like play in a university and go on to be like an NFL star. I mean, he was like that good when he was in high school. And there was already people with eyes on him, whatever, for the future of his football career. I think he had gotten hurt. And from what he was only, okay, so I'm like 21 at the time. He's probably like 24, 25. And cool as fuck. His name was Matt. He was like the first drug dealer I'd ever seen that would go around, and he'd have like 9 million. He'd have straps on him, and he'd just like get all wasted and shoot holes in walls and hotels. He was wild, right? This guy, what I had heard is that he fucked up his football career, I think with an injury or something. And now he was like a coke dealer, and he was addicted to coke. I mean, the kind of part, and that's what the series is really going to focus on, is like parting with him and like all the weird stuff that went down. But when I first met him, he was selling cocaine to this couple, and he was from Sacramento. And what they had told me is that he was this ex-football star, and there were like all these newspaper articles written about him. And what he would do is when nobody was looking, he would take this folded article out of his pocket, he would read it, and like, it was, I guess it was like really sad. Like, they'd always tell me like he was just heartbroken that he didn't go on to realize his dreams with the potential that he had had. I had another guy that got drafted the Dodgers that got into heroin, and he never ended up making his career. So I knew another person like that as well. And it's always heartbreaking to see somebody that really has like, that's very gifted, and they just, you know, they're tortured by their addiction and they can't get it together. But this guy, Matt, comes over, he sells the coke to Kevin and Erica, and he's selling them kilos. Now, I wasn't a stranger to kilos of cocaine. When I was 17 years old, remember, my girlfriend was 21, her name was Jillian, and Jill's dad was a biker that sold keys of coke. So I'd been seeing bricks since I was a kid. Shit, I had driven around, we haven't gotten to that, but in the juvenile delinquency series, there was periods where I drove around with keys of coke in my car when I was 17. I'm listening to like Blink 182, and I'm just like whistling to it, and I have like a fucking key of coke. I'm like, you go to prison for like, get like a YA life term, do like 7 years on that. Not a care in the world. So when I met Matt, you know, and I think that that's always helped me with like famous people too, is one thing that I've noticed about celebrities, same thing with big time drug dealers, is they like people that aren't excitable. You know, I don't ever meet someone famous and be like, oh my God, dude, you were in Texas Chainsaw Massacre Part 3, right? I was. You know, it's like the only movie they'd been in. I never like fan out, right? Like, it's not like when I met Johnny Depp. Okay, let's use him as an example. It's not like I was like, oh my God, Johnny. And I like started like taking his hair and like sniffing it and fingering my ass. I was like, dude, I'm such a fan, man. There's really people like that. He's told me that. He told me that he can't even walk down the street. Like, some lady like bit his fucking face last time he did that in New York. Crazy stuff like that. So when I meet like a famous person, I'm just like, it's almost like how you have to be with like a hot chick. Like, oh, hey, how you doing? Not even care about them. But hold on, I gotta check the crypto market on my phone. Yeah, no, we'll talk in a minute. It's nice to meet you, John. What is it, John? Jeff? Johnny. Johnny, nice to meet you, man. They like people like that, right? Same with drug dealers. So like, this guy, Matt, a lot of times they like the excitable people as fans, right? So there's like a difference between a fan and somebody that you see eye to eye with when you're in that world. And so like the fans, like Matt would like, you know, he'd be like, hey, I got to count my key and make sure there's 1,000 grams in here. And he'd like unveil this brick, and there'd be all these like college girls. They'd be like, oh my God, that's so much cocaine. I'm so down to suck your cock. And he's like, I know. Here's my cock to suck. And they're like, oh my God, I love it. So many grams. So those are like the people that get excitable. And then there's like dudes that are like that too. They're like, oh my God, bro, this shit's so dope. Can I suck your dick? And then he's like, no, I don't. What the fuck? You're a guy. Fuck up. You know, fuck off. And then there's like someone like me, and just shows me the key, and I'm like, oh, that's cool. And I'm like not even paying attention to it because it legitimately doesn't impress me. I don't care about it. I've been around it a lot. To a lot of people, if you see a brick of cocaine, kilo, fat chunk, 1,000 grams, you know, talking about $20,000 worth of blow. So a lot of people would be like, oh, damn, that's crazy. And I think that because I wasn't excitable, you know, he'd be over there breaking them off. I think that he started liking me. You know, he thought that, and this is before I'd even really become like a big time drug dealer. At that time, I'm just hustling Molly through Jacob. We're making our MDMA caps or whatever. And like once in a while, like I'll give some to the couple in IV. I'll give some to him. I have a few other people that I'm giving to as samples. I have people that are like in the bar scene that are just starting to sell that stuff at bars. And I'm at this guy's house, and at the couple's house, and he's over there. He would come over and he'd give them a couple keys a week, probably twice a week, you know. Key in the beginning of the week, another key at the end. So like 2 in a 7-day period, which is a lot. That's 2,000 grams of cocaine that this couple's going through. And I remember probably like not the first time, you know, I'd met him, we exchanged phone numbers, and it was cool to have somebody that I could call at any time and get a kilo. Back in that time period, a kilo was going for 15,000. You know, right now in LA, they're going for like 28, 29,000. They're fucking expensive. And I heard because of COVID, everything's just going to keep going up and up and up. It's almost 30,000 for a kilo. And there's other parts of the country where that's how much it costs right now. But I think like one of the second or third times that I met him, he told me that Damien had burned him for quite a bit of money. Damien's the guy with the bulge and the Speedo, right? Now, at this time period, I was still getting Molly from Damien. But I knew, and I had talked about this with the first time that I'd done this series, I knew that he had a bigger connection. And that's always what you want, right? You always want to eliminate the middleman. And I knew that there was somebody this guy, first time I met him, had $250,000 different psychedelics. He had cocaine. I knew that he was working for somebody in a large capacity just because he had a fucking Bill and Ted mentality. He's like, yeah, brother. You talk like that. Who's going to take somebody like that seriously? Yeah, I'm going to give that guy $250,000. You know, he was so loopy and he walked around in a Speedo. That's not an exaggeration. It's not hyperbolic at all. This dude walked around with a Speedo with a 6 or a 7 for the bulge. So I would always be with him in the car, and he'd always be like, I got to go to Wells Fargo because he had to do cash deposits. Back then, I think he could do 5,000 at a time without having to fill out anything and the IRS getting involved. So we'd always have to go do these cash deposits at the bank, and those deposits would go to his dealer. I didn't know who it was. I knew it was somebody. Multiple times I had gone and done deposits for him at Wells Fargo, and he'd give me $500 cash. So on top of selling the drugs, I was also stacking money because I had these different opportunities because I'm hanging out with the couple in Ivy. I'm hanging out with Damien. I'm hanging out with Matt. All of these people are making a lot of money selling drugs, and I'm just getting into it. They all kind of like me, you know, they like my personality, and they want to help me. Like, all of them are helping me, like, secure my position of being a drug dealer, because I think that they saw that I had maybe not like I don't know if street smarts is the right word. I think they liked me because I had like a charisma about me. You know, I'd make them laugh and I'd say just off the wall stuff. They had a Halloween party and I went as an informant. You know, I was like, had like a microphone taped to my bare chest, and I was walking around all night like being like, hey man, you know where I can get a kilo? You know, and they thought that kind of stuff was funny. So I always had my target set on getting the drug dealer that was past Damien. No, Damon wasn't his real name. Damien was his name. Fuck. Doesn't matter. This will never go on YouTube. It doesn't matter. And so now I'm meeting Matt for the second or third time, and he's telling me that Damien owes him pretty significant amount of money. I think it was like, I don't know, 15, 20K, somewhere in there. I don't really remember, but it was like enough where it was a big deal for Matt. Basically, he said that there was an issue because he was fronting. Okay, so the first time that I'd met Damien and he showed me that trunk full of drugs, part of what he had showed me was this kilo inside of the trunk. And that coke was coming from this guy, Matt, that was at the couples. That guy, Matt, was from Sacramento, the ex-football star. He was coming down to Santa Barbara. He was selling coke to the couple. He was selling coke to Damien. And now he was starting to kind of not really sell it to me, but just it was crazy partying with him, because we go to college parties and there'd just be like this, look like a school of fish, but these college like cock-sucking zombies. They'd be like, let's go in the bathroom and snort blow. And he'd be just getting his dick sucked. But it was insane. Felt like I was in like a fucking music video or something. and then definitely this series will start talking about like all the crazy, weird, like orgy and weird shit. Like he took me to my first sex party and just way out stuff, right? So Damien, god damn, his fucking name was Damon, okay? Damon owed him this money. And the reason that he owed him money was because somebody owed Damon the money. And it was a big deal because Damon kept like kind of giving the runaround. Now, this guy, Matt, he was no punk. He wasn't from Santa Barbara. You know, he was from Sacramento. He was like a real gangster kind of guy. You know, he was nice, but he drove around an Escalade and he was packing gas all the time, you know, and he was shooting shit. He'd get all wasted. Like I said, he'd blow holes and be at like a nice hotel and he'd be like, what? You think I'm a bitch? Bah, bah. Just start blasting on the wall. I'm like, oh, that's smart. We have a goddamn quarter pound of coke in this motel room. He's like, I don't care. We'll blame it on those bitches right there. See, and that's how he was, you know? He's just kind of like out of his mind. And so I'm over at the couple's house, and him and I had already kind of struck up like this, like, you know, alliance. Like, we were like, there was solidarity between the two of us. And he's telling me that about the Damon situation, that he owes him like 15 or 20K. And he tells me that it gets worse because the reason that Damon owes him that money is because Damon had been fronting it to another person. So it was like a front on top of a front on top of a front. And you can't really do drug dealing like that. I mean, at a certain point, it becomes a Ponzi scheme. You know, you can extend credit. Like if you look at selling drugs as if it's like a chain, right? You can sell drugs, and then that person can extend credit. But you can't give credit to this person, and that person gives somebody credit, and then that person gives somebody credit, because it becomes the robbing Peter to pay Paul Ponzi scheme aspect of drug dealing, and you can't do that because pyramid schemes inevitably fail, right? So I guess Matt, he had all these guns. He had all these like really gangster friends that he'd hang out with, you know. I think he like recruited crackheads from like Oakland and like the Bay Area, people from Northern California, all black guys. They all wear Raiders gear and shit. And they would come down with him and kind of like be his muscle. And he had hurt quite a few people. I know there was a situation where somebody had stolen from him. Not a lot, like an ounce or two of coke. This person was a college-age drug dealer. And Matt had paid somebody, some crazy black guy, to go into this kid that had stolen from him was like a college kid in Santa Barbara. This black dude goes in the middle of the night into this house. It was like a duplex. Goes into the kid's room, holds him down, puts, so his stomach is flat, puts his arm behind his back, and he's telling him, he's like, hey man, and you know, the white kid from Santa Barbara's thrashed in her, like, please help me. And he's telling him, he's like, hey man, the reason that I'm breaking your arm is because you stole drugs from my homie Matt. So just so you know. The guy's like, no, and he just fucking breaks the dude's arm. Like, this guy was like some massive guy, snapped the dude's arm back, broke it. Like, that was like folklore that we had heard in Santa Barbara about Matt, because you know, it wasn't from there. And again, the whole reoccurring theme of this story, and this whole series for that matter, is that when you're in prison, when you're a drug dealer, you start playing the part. So like, you think, oh, someone owes me money, I'm going to pay a minority to go break his arm. You know, he'll be my juice. And that's like how people think and stuff when you get to this like weird, like wannabe level of drug dealer. So with that being said, we're at this house. I'm out on the porch. I'm smoking cigarettes. I'm talking to Matt about the situation. And he says that he was putting pressure on Damon. Damon's cool, smart guy, burnout, a big old bulge in a Speedo. But the thing with Damon is he panics. You know, he's like one of those guys, if you put too much pressure on him, he cracks. Now, when you sell drugs and you're in the drug world, there's large amounts of money being exchanged, especially when it got bigger. When I started selling things and I'd, you know, yield $50,000 on one fucking transaction. That's crazy, you know. Most people have never made $50,000 cash in their entire life. I was 23 years old. That was happening to me regularly, sometimes a few times in a month, shit like that. When you start making that kind of money, bad things can happen, A, and B, a lot of people like crack under pressure and panic. And Damon was one of those people. Matt had showed up to his house with a gun already on a couple occasions. And what he would do is he'd go in there just like in a movie, talk to him. The whole time they're having the conversation, he'd put like the 45 down on the table. And he'd just sit there with his legs crossed, you know? And he'd be like, look, man, like, I don't want to have to do anything that I'll regret or that you'll regret, but, you know, it's going to happen if you don't pay me. So the kind of pressure that he was applying on Damon was very effective. And all this money that was owed to him, Damon started freaking out. I'd never even heard of this situation. You know, Matt was telling me about it. It was the first time I'd ever heard about it. But what he told me was that Damon had essentially kidnapped the dude that owed him the money for the blows girlfriend. He had a girl, like, that's how much, you know, he wasn't like the toughest guy in the world, right? I mean, yeah, that's some bitch shit when you're going to go and you're going to kidnap somebody's girl, you know? And I was like, what do you mean he kidnapped somebody's girl? And he's like, starts telling me the story about it. So what had happened is him and his friends had, I guess, like, you know, back then, I forget what the name of it. It was called, God, I don't know why I can't think of it. I think it was called Blackwater. It was this independent group that was ex-military that would provide security or would do militaristic missions for the private sector. Sometimes they'd be outsourced by the feds. Now, back in that time, Blackwater was being used to go raid cannabis dispensaries, right? So, and you'd hear crazy shit. Like, you'd hear stories about helicopters showing up at dispensaries that had, like, silencers on the rotators so that you wouldn't even hear the helicopter that's over the dispensary, right? And then Blackwater would run in with guns. They'd zip tie them. They'd take all their weed and they'd say, okay, you know, we're here basically for the DEA and they want you to shut it down. But they would take all the weed. So Blackwater was essentially some legalized gang for the private sector. Like I said, they could be outsourced for the FBI, CIA, NSA, but they could also, I could pay them. I could be like, hey, Blackwater, I need you to, you know, go do this. And they do it. It's basically a security firm with armed security guards on steroids that can actually do missions. That's my best understanding of it anyway. And back in that time period, medical marijuana was on the rise. So it was, you know, it was the kind of thing where people, you know, cannabis clubs were popping up all over the place. It was a new thing. And you could go to a place and you could buy weed in a commercial venue, right? Just go up to the counter. You say, okay, I want a 1/4 ounce of Trainwreck. I want a gram of bubble hash. Let me try some of that, you know, some of those edibles, whatever. You walk out with this little white, you know, lunch sack and you have a bunch of weed. But there was a lot of politics that was going on, you know, behind the scenes with all that. And Blackwater was very much a part of that. The Bush administration was in power at the time. They basically had waged wars on medicinal marijuana. And Blackwater was going around robbing people at gunpoint, zip tying them, all legally, under the pretense that because it's illegal federally, they had federal authorization because those were their employers to come in and zip tie you and take all your weed and give you like a verbal warning. Like, okay, this is your verbal warning. Never again. So this guy that owed money for Damon, I never met him, but he was a guy, and there were a lot of guys like this that had a big grow operation in Santa Barbara. Santa Barbara has really become one of the hotbeds for recreational marijuana, legal recreational marijuana in recent years. Back then, in the medicinal gold rush in the early 2000s, Santa Barbara was also a hotbed for the medical marijuana industry. But it was like the wild fucking West. You know, shit like this was happening all the time. Blackwater would come and jack a dispensary. Sometimes you'd find out that it was another dispensary paying for Blackwater to do it, to take them out, to take out the competition. Maybe they didn't pay off the local, you know, authorities. So now the local authorities were coming and shaking them down. It was the Wild West. And what had happened is Damon panicked because Matt was putting pressure on him. This guy was growing weed, but he was also selling some blow on the side. I think he owed him 15 grand. And it might have been a little more, 20, whatever. We'll say 15 though. And Matt had come down with a gun multiple times and been like, hey man, check it out. If you don't pay me, I'm going to send people down here and they're going to fuck you off. And everybody had heard the story about the guy that got his arm broken, right? So Damon freaks out. And so him and his friends dress up like Blackwater, go over to this dude's house, trying to take him like an alpha dog. Similar situation. Kind of. Not really, because this one's way fucking, well, I don't know. Not worse than that. But I don't like it when you're kidnapping anybody, but especially women. Minors and women, like, no. So they go into this house, and this is one of those situations, and this was very common, and I ran into this shit all the time back then. People that had grow operations would live at their grows, but they'd also have like another house that they lived at. So they'd spend a lot of time at these grow, they'd have like a little tiny like studio set up in like a 2-bedroom house, and they'd like sleep there and like guard the plants. There were different shifts. So this guy had this particular grow. They had like figured out that he would go and sleep over at the grow operation. They wanted to steal the weed, but they also wanted, to get his money or whatever. They never planned on taking anybody. But I guess what had happened, and this is what Matt was telling me, was they go over to this grow operation and there was some bud there, but not very much. Like it had just harvested, it was like the only thing they could take was plants. There was some trimming there. There was some stuff that I think, they came up on like a couple pounds or whatever. And whatever the case, it wasn't enough to squash the debt. And while they're there, the guy that owes the money isn't there, but his girlfriend is there for some reason. She's like in pajamas. Now, Damon and his boy, out of desperation, had gone in there with guns, but they also had zip ties, and they were just going to rob these people, And by the way, they're both wearing ski masks. They're wearing ski masks, bulletproof vests, all that. It's crazy shit. This stuff like this happens to this day in this industry. And she freaks out. This is all secondhand. I wasn't there when it happened, but this is what I was told. She's like, ah! And they run up, they zip tie her. They ask her where the money's at. She's like, it's not here. They're asking her to they're like, well, you need to take us to the money because your boyfriend owes us money or whatever. She refuses to do it. So they end up taking the girl to Damon's house. The same place that I had met him originally, where he had the Speedo and the bulge. And Matt's telling me about this situation. Because now what he's telling me is he's like, dude, this fucking idiot goes in, he kidnaps a girl of this other guy. Other guy's not like super powerful or whatever, he's just like your typical marijuana grower. Problem is that the guy's brother is really, really, really big in the industry for marijuana, right? And he's pissed about it. And basically, they're putting the blame on Matt because they think that Matt did it because it's not Damon's style to go in and do stuff like that. This sounds like something that Matt would do. So he's at this house telling me that basically we had to figure out a way to rectify that situation because now it was coming down on him. And there was actually somebody that was brothers to the guy that had owed Damon money, whose girlfriend they had kidnapped, that was like a threat. He's like, this is someone we don't really want to fuck with. It'll create issues for us in Santa Barbara. Like, the whole, like, you're looking over your shoulder thing, which I could relate to because I had stabbed a skinhead a couple years before that. So he wanted to try to figure out how to fix the situation. And I'm like, kind of just listening to him. And he said, the smartest thing that we can do is go get the girl, because we both were friends with Damon. I mean, I was hanging out with the guy all the time, and he's like, we can go to his house and we can find her, or he's really asking me to do it. He was just going to be outside, and then he wanted me to release her. Therefore, the liability wouldn't be on him, and it puts Damon back in the same situation. But we didn't know if he was going to give her up easily or not. But the guy wanted to drive me over there. He's like, hey, you're on good enough terms with him where you can go over there without suspicion. You can see if this girl's there. If she is there, let her go, and I'll drive her out of here. I'll park down the street or whatever. So I'm kind of looking at the whole situation, and what like the scope for the larger picture is with this. This couple, they're cool, amazing. I'm still friends with them to this day. They're really great people. They're been out of the drug industry for years and years and years. Both of them are very successful now. They have degrees. They went on to like have kids, and not together, but you know, they have good lives respectively. You know, I wanted to sustain my relationship with them. I only met Matt 2 or 3 times when we had this conversation, but he seemed like somebody that I wanted to know long term. Damon, the only fucking purpose that I even wanted to have that guy in my life was because I had the ambition to get his connection that was above him. So that was kind of like what, you know, I didn't really care about him as a friend. You know, his bulge was like that big. How can I be friends with a fucking dude like that? I can't. I'll always be thinking about that no matter what. We can be snowboarding and I'll just be like, hey man, you're a bitch. He's like, what? Huh? Or it's just me projecting. But basically I was like, you know, my loyalty wasn't really secure with him. I felt more, not loyal, I guess it felt smarter to help them instead of to help Damon, if that makes sense. You know, I didn't know what was going to happen to Damon. And I asked Matt, I was like, well, if I go help get this girl from his house, you know, that's another thing. You know, this is what happened in Alpha Dog. And I don't like that movie because I think that it's unrealistic. Plus, I know some of the guys that were involved with that took place in Santa Barbara. The real name of that case was Jesse James Hollywood. You can Google it. It happened in Santa Barbara. And I knew Graham Presley. I knew a couple of those guys. Jenny knew all of them. And I had seen Jesse James Hollywood in prison when they extradited from Brazil in 2005. But the point of the movie, when they kidnap people like that, that is a real thing that happens very often over very small debts. You know, we're talking about 15, 20 grand, whatever it was. Not worth kidnapping somebody because you can get 25 years to life in prison for something like that. So it's kind of like a tricky situation to begin with. And I think that we'll use this as like the springboard to do this series, because the Damon situation with the girl was like the first major kind of obstacle, you know, that I came across. Because now I was in a weird position where I wanted Matt, I wanted the couple, I wanted those guys to like me. Damon, I wanted his connection because it was like a 1 in a million connection to get these massive quantities of all these different club drugs. But for some reason, I just decided to be on these other people's side. Kind of like, I don't know if betrayal is the right word. It just seemed like, you know, on top of it all, morally, a girl had been kidnapped. You know, I mean, even at that age, I wasn't cool with that shit. And we will continue this on the next video. This one was like 1 hour and 13 minutes. You guys are probably mad at me because, you know, I've been slacking or whatever. But just know that I know that, and I want to make it up to you guys. So this is definitely not going to be the only video today. I'm going to try to do 2 more. I'd be very happy if I can get 3 done in total today. I know you guys would be too. Appreciate you all. Palabra.